Thomas Reed's greenhouse was his sanctuary. The morning sun filtered through the glass panels, casting prismatic patterns on the rare specimens he'd spent years cultivating. As he misted his prized Nepenthes raja, a carnivorous pitcher plant from Borneo, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Again. The sensation had started 3 weeks ago. At first, it was just a whisper of awareness, like the ghost of a breeze across his neck. Then came the glimpses, a tall figure with silver-white hair, always at the edge of his vision, always gone when he turned to look properly. Thomas wasn't the type to attract attention. At 32, he lived alone in a modest house on the outskirts of Seattle, surrounded by his beloved plants and research papers. His only regular visitors were his doctoral students and fellow botanists who shared his passion for endangered species preservation. Yet here he was, jumping at shadows and seeing mysterious women everywhere he went. "You're losing it, old man," he muttered to himself, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. The pitcher plant's deep crimson mouth gaped back at him, offering no answers. He checked his watch, almost time for his weekly lecture at the university. The biology building was quiet when he arrived, most students still sleeping off their weekend adventures. Thomas set up his presentation on rare alpine flora, trying to focus on the familiar routine. But as he began speaking to his gradually filling classroom, he saw her. She sat in the back row, straight-backed and still as a statue. Her appearance was striking yet somehow wrong, like a hyperrealistic painting where the artist had missed some fundamental aspect of human nature. Her skin had an opalescent quality that seemed to shift in the fluorescent lighting, and her silver-white hair fell in impossibly straight lines past her shoulders. Their eyes met, and Thomas forgot what he was saying mid-sentence. Her irises were the color of Arctic ice, with an inner luminescence that couldn't be natural. A student's question snapped him back to reality, and when he looked again, her seat was empty. After class, Thomas practically ran to his office, his heart pounding. He needed to talk to someone about this, someone who wouldn't think he was crazy. He pulled out his phone and called the one person who might understand. "Olivia? Can you meet me for coffee? It's important." 20 minutes later, he sat across from his oldest friend at their favorite coffee shop. Dr. Olivia Martinez, head of the university's astronomy department, listened without interruption as he described the mysterious woman and the sensation of being watched. "So," she said when he finished, stirring her cappuccino thoughtfully, "either you've developed paranoid delusions, or you're being stalked by someone who doesn't quite look human. Have you considered a third option?" Thomas leaned forward. "What's that?" "That both things are true, but not in the way you think." Olivia's dark eyes sparkled with excitement. "What if she's not human at all?" Thomas started to laugh, but the sound died in his throat as he remembered those impossible eyes. "That's ridiculous," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? We've been detecting anomalous signals from the Kepler 186 system for months now. Something's out there, Thomas. Maybe they're closer than we think." Before Thomas could respond, a movement caught his eye. Through the coffee shop window, he saw her standing across the street, watching. This time, she didn't disappear when he looked at her. Instead, she raised one elegant hand and beckoned to him. "Olivia," he said quietly, "don't turn around, but she's here." Olivia, of course, immediately turned around. "Holy shit," she breathed. "Thomas, that's not a human being." "I know," he replied, standing up. "And I think it's time I found out what she wants." "Wait." Olivia grabbed his arm. "This could be dangerous. We should call someone." "Who? The police? The FBI? And tell them what?" Thomas gently removed her hand. "I'll be careful. But I need to know." He walked out of the coffee shop, his legs carrying him forward despite his brain screaming at him to run the other way. The woman waited, perfectly still, as he crossed the street. Up close, her otherworldliness was even more apparent. Her skin seemed to contain tiny points of light, like stars seen through a thin cloud layer. "Thomas Reed," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made his bones vibrate. "I apologize for frightening you. That was not my intent." "Who are you?" he managed to ask. "What are you?" "My name is Nalia." "And what I am?" She paused, glancing around at the busy street. "Perhaps we should discuss that somewhere more private. Your greenhouse, perhaps? I find your collection of Earth's flora fascinating." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. She'd been watching him in his most private space, his sanctuary. Yet instead of fear, he felt an overwhelming curiosity. Here was a mystery greater than any he'd encountered in his research, a discovery that could change everything. "All right," he heard himself say. "But I want answers. Real ones." Nalia's lips curved in what might have been a smile, though it didn't quite reach her luminous eyes. "Of course. After all, that's why I chose you, Thomas. Your pursuit of knowledge outweighs your fear of the unknown. It's one of your most admirable qualities." As they walked toward his car, Thomas caught sight of Olivia watching from the coffee shop window, her phone pressed to her ear. He gave her what he hoped was a reassuring wave. Whatever was about to happen, whatever Nalia was about to reveal, he knew his life would never be the same. The afternoon sun was setting as they reached his greenhouse, painting the glass panels in shades of amber and gold. Nalia moved among his plants with the grace of a dancer, her fingers hovering just above the leaves without touching them. "Your world is so alive," she said softly. "So full of variety and chaos and beauty. We lost that, long ago. We lost many things." "We?" Thomas asked, watching her careful movements. Nalia turned to face him, her stellar skin glowing in the fading light. "My people. The Varans. We come from a world you would call Kepler 186f, though that is not our name for it. We have been watching Earth for a very long time, Thomas. Watching and learning. And now, we need your help." "My help? What could I possibly do for beings capable of interstellar travel?" "You can teach us how to feel again," Nalia said, her voice filled with an emotion that seemed both foreign and familiar. "You can help us remember what it means to be truly alive." Thomas stared at Nalia, her words echoing in his greenhouse. The last rays of sunlight caught the crystalline structures beneath her skin, creating patterns that reminded him of Aurora Borealis. "Teach you to feel?" he repeated, trying to process the magnitude of her request. "I don't understand. How can a civilization advanced enough to cross light years lose its ability to feel?" Nalia moved to one of his rarest specimens, a ghost orchid that had taken years to cultivate. "Progress isn't always forward, Thomas. In our drive for perfection, we engineered ourselves to be more efficient, more logical. We viewed emotions as evolutionary baggage, something to be eliminated for the greater good of our species." Her fingers hovered over the delicate white petals. "We succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. And in doing so, we failed completely." The greenhouse had grown darker, and Thomas switched on the ambient lighting he used for his nocturnal species. The soft blue glow made Nalia look even more ethereal. "But you seem to have emotions," he observed. "I can hear longing in your voice, see curiosity in your movements." "I am different," she admitted. "A genetic throwback, they call it. One of the few among my people who still retain shadows of what we once were. That's why they sent me. I can still recognize emotions, even if I can't fully experience them myself." She turned to face him. "When we first detected your broadcasts, your art, your music, we realized what we had lost. But it was your gardens that drew me to you specifically." Thomas frowned. "My gardens? Why?" "Because only someone who truly feels could create such beauty without practical purpose. Your care for these plants goes beyond scientific interest. You love them. She spoke the word love as if it were in a foreign language, testing its shape and sound. Before Thomas could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Olivia: satellite imagery shows something massive in orbit on the dark side of the moon. Government channels are going crazy. Please tell me you're okay. Your friend is very protective, Nalia observed, though she couldn't possibly have seen the screen from where she stood. And yes, our ship is there. We couldn't risk closer contact yet. Human governments can be unpredictable. Thomas let out a shaky laugh. Right now, everything feels unpredictable. He sat down on one of his work stools, running a hand through his dark hair. So what exactly do you want from me? I'm just a botanist. I'm not a psychiatrist or a neurologist or whatever kind of scientist deals with rebuilding emotional capacity in an alien species. We don't need a scientist, Nalia said, stepping closer. We need someone who understands the value of nurturing life, of forming connections with beings different from yourself. Someone who can teach by example. She paused, her luminous eyes searching his face. We need someone who can show us how to care again. And if I refuse? Then I leave, and we find another way. Her response was immediate and honest. We are not here to force anything, Thomas. That would defeat the purpose entirely. Thomas stood and walked to his ghost orchid, gently touching one of its leaves. Tell me more about your world, he said finally. Help me understand what I'd be getting into. For the next hour, Nalia described her civilization. The Varans had achieved technological marvels beyond human imagination, but their cities were sterile monuments to efficiency. Their children were created in laboratories, raised by automated systems to be perfect logical beings. Art existed only as mathematical equations, music as precise acoustic formulas. They had eliminated war, poverty, and crime, but also joy, love, and wonder. We are dying, she concluded softly. Not physically, we can live for centuries. But as a culture, as a species capable of growth and change, we are slowly fading away. Each generation is more distant, more disconnected than the last. And your people think humans can help with this? Some do. Others think it's a waste of resources. But those of us who retain even a fraction of our emotional capacity can see where our path leads. Without intervention, we will eventually become nothing more than organic computers, processing existence without experiencing it. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, listening to the soft hum of his greenhouse's environmental systems. Finally, he asked, why tell me all this? Why not go to world leaders, make some kind of official first contact? Nalia's expression shifted subtly, the closest thing to a real smile he'd seen from her. Because you asked about our world first, not our technology or our power. Because even now, surrounded by impossible things, you're still ensuring your plants have the right humidity levels. She gestured to the mister he'd been unconsciously adjusting. You understand that the greatest wonders can come in the smallest packages. Just then, Thomas's phone buzzed again. Multiple messages from Olivia, news alerts, social media notifications. The word was getting out. Something was happening in space, something big enough that it couldn't be hidden. We don't have much time, Nalia said. Soon, your governments will confirm our presence. Things will become complicated. I need your answer, Thomas. Will you help us? Thomas looked around his greenhouse, at the carefully tended plants he'd devoted his life to preserving and understanding. Each one was a tiny miracle, a unique expression of life's endless creativity. He thought about Nalia's people, who had gained the stars but lost their souls. He thought about the incredible opportunity being offered to him, and the terrifying responsibility that came with it. I have conditions, he said finally. I need to know everything, no more secrets. And I need assurance that Earth won't be harmed in any way. Agreed, Nalia replied immediately. Though I should warn you, there are things about us, about this situation, that may be difficult for you to accept. When I was 12, I successfully grafted a ghost orchid onto a common house plant because everyone said it was impossible, Thomas said, allowing himself a small smile. I'm pretty good at accepting difficult things. Nalia tilted her head, studying him with those luminous eyes. Then perhaps there is hope for both our species. She held out her hand, a very human gesture that she must have learned from observation. Shall we begin? Thomas took her hand. Her skin was cool and smooth, humming with an energy he couldn't explain. As their fingers touched, he felt a subtle shift in the air, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. We begin, he agreed, stepping into an adventure that would change not just his life, but the fate of two worlds. The world erupted into chaos within hours of the Varan ship's discovery. Thomas watched the news unfold on his tablet while Nalia made arrangements for their departure. Military vessels were mobilizing, stock markets were crashing, and religious leaders were either proclaiming the end times or a new age of enlightenment. Your species reacts so strongly to change, Nalia observed, her fingers dancing over a translucent device that seemed to float in the air. It's fascinating. That's one word for it, Thomas muttered, reading another headline about panic buying and protests. Are you sure we shouldn't wait? Try to do this officially? The official channels are already in motion, she replied. But they will take weeks, perhaps months to navigate. We don't have that kind of time. She paused, turning to face him. Having second thoughts? Thomas looked around his greenhouse one last time. He'd spent the last hour programming his automated systems and leaving detailed care instructions for his graduate students. No, he said finally. Just wondering if I'm crazy. Sanity is overrated, came a familiar voice from the doorway. Olivia stood there, looking both exhausted and exhilarated. The observatory's been chaos since the announcement. Every telescope on Earth is pointed at your friends up there, Nalia. The alien woman inclined her head in acknowledgement. Dr. Martinez. Thank you for not alerting the authorities about my presence earlier. Olivia shrugged. I figured if you wanted to harm us, you wouldn't have spent weeks just following Thomas around his garden. She moved forward, hugging Thomas tightly. You better come back, you understand? I want a full report on everything you see up there. Thomas hugged her back, grateful for her understanding. Take care of my plants? Of course. Though that Venus flytrap of yours still hates me. She just needs time to warm up to you, Thomas smiled, then grew serious. If anyone asks. You're at a botanical conference in Sweden. I know. Olivia stepped back, wiping her eyes. The cover story's already arranged. Your department head thinks you're doing confidential research for a pharmaceutical company. Nalia's device chimed softly. It's time, she said. The transport window is opening. Thomas picked up his small bag. He'd been told to pack light, that everything he needed would be provided. It felt surreal, like a dream he couldn't quite believe was happening. Ready, he said, though his voice shook slightly. Nalia moved to stand beside him, her presence both alien and somehow comforting. Close your eyes, she instructed. The first translation can be disorienting. The last thing Thomas saw was Olivia's brave smile, then the world dissolved into light. When he opened his eyes again, he was standing in a chamber that defied his understanding of geometry. The walls seemed to flow like liquid mercury, yet they were clearly solid. The air had a slight metallic taste, and the gravity felt just a fraction lighter than Earth's. Welcome to the Stellaris, Nalia said, leading him forward. Our home among the stars. The next few hours were a blur of impossibilities. Thomas met other Varans, each as hauntingly beautiful and eerily distant as Nalia, though none showed even her limited range of emotion. They spoke perfect English, explaining that they had learned all Earth languages years ago, but their voices held no warmth or inflection. His quarters were a marvel of organic technology, responding to his thoughts and adjusting to his comfort needs automatically. Through a window that could zoom in like a telescope, he watched Earth grow smaller as the ship began its journey to the Varan homeworld. "How are you processing everything?" Nalia asked, finding him still staring out the window hours later. "Honestly? I'm not sure I am," Thomas admitted. "It's like my brain keeps trying to categorize all this as a dream, but it's too real, too detailed." He turned to her. "Your people, though, you weren't exaggerating about their emotional state. It's like talking to extremely sophisticated computers." "That comparison would not offend them," Nalia said, moving to stand beside him. "Many would take it as a compliment." As if to prove her point, another Varan appeared in the doorway. Taller than Nalia, with skin that rippled like the northern lights, he regarded them with clinical interest. "The human appears to be adapting well to our environment," he stated. "Remarkable resilience. We should begin the preliminary scans." "No, Rian," Nalia said firmly. "We agreed, he needs time to acclimate." Rian's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. "Time is a luxury we cannot afford." The council grows impatient. They want results. Thomas looked between them, sensing an underlying tension. "What kind of scans are we talking about?" "Nothing invasive," Nalia assured him quickly, too quickly. "Just baseline readings of your neural patterns during emotional responses." "You're not being entirely truthful," Thomas observed, studying her face. "There's something you haven't told me." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Rian broke it with characteristic Varan directness. "We need to understand how your species processes emotions at a fundamental level. The scans are merely the first step in a series of experiments designed to isolate and potentially replicate human emotional capacity." "Replicate?" Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "You mean, copy? Transfer?" "Rian," Nalia warned, but the other Varan continued. "Your emotional responses are tied to specific neurochemical and bioelectrical patterns. If we can decode these patterns, we may be able to reintegrate them into our own biology. Your participation could save our species." Thomas stepped back from both of them. "By turning your people into what, exactly? Copies of human beings? Is that really what you want?" "What we want is irrelevant," Rian said. "What we need is survival." "Enough." Nalia's voice carried a force that made both Thomas and Rian turn to her in surprise. "This is not how we agreed to proceed. Thomas is our guest, not our test subject. He's here to help us understand emotions through experience and interaction, not to be dissected and analyzed." Rian regarded her for a long moment. "Your genetic throwback is showing, Nalia. The council will not be pleased." He turned and left without another word. Thomas waited until he was sure Rian was gone before speaking. "You knew about this." Nalia didn't deny it. "It's one faction's approach to our problem. There are others who support my method, natural rehabilitation through cultural exchange. But yes, I should have told you." "Why didn't you?" She turned to him, and for the first time, he saw a real emotion in her luminous eyes, fear. "Because I need your help to stop them. The Varan who want to take shortcuts, who think they can simply copy and paste emotions back into our species, they don't understand what they're dealing with. They could destroy both our peoples in the process." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, feeling overwhelmed. "So now I'm not just here to teach your people how to feel, I'm here to prevent them from doing something catastrophically stupid?" "Welcome to interstellar politics," Nalia said, with a ghost of a smile. "Still think you're crazy for coming?" Despite everything, Thomas found himself laughing. "Completely crazy. But I'm here now." He looked out at the stars streaking past. So tell me everything, and this time, no holding back. What are we really up against? The Varen homeworld hung before them like a jewel carved from ice and starlight. Through the ship's viewing portal, Thomas could see vast cities that seemed to grow from the planet's surface like crystal formations, their spires reaching toward the dual moons that painted the sky in perpetual twilight. Beautiful, he breathed, pressing his hand against the transparent barrier. But cold. Like its people, Nalia said softly beside him. After their confrontation with Rian, she had spent hours explaining the full scope of the situation. The Varen Council was divided between those who sought to forcibly extract and replicate human emotions, and those who believed in Nalia's more gradual approach to cultural rehabilitation. How long until we land? Thomas asked, noting the increased activity among the ship's crew. 2 planetary rotations. The Council is preparing for your arrival. Nalia's expression was troubled. Thomas, there's something else you need to know. Something I've discovered in the ship's secure databases. She led him to his quarters, activating a privacy field that surrounded them in a bubble of shifting light. The faction that supports emotional extraction, they've already begun experiments. On humans. Thomas felt his blood run cold. What? How? Abductions. Carefully selected individuals from remote areas, their disappearances disguised as accidents or unexplained events. The results have been catastrophic. Nalia's voice trembled slightly, a sign of how much she'd changed in their weeks together. The human subjects didn't survive the extraction process. And the Varens who received the transferred emotional patterns went insane. The mind cannot simply receive emotions it isn't prepared to handle. Thomas sank into a chair, his mind racing. How many? 17 attempts. All failures. But they're not stopping. They believe they're close to a breakthrough, and with you here. She didn't finish the sentence. They want to use me as their next test subject, Thomas concluded. It wasn't a question. You're different from the others. You came willingly, you understand our purpose, and you've already shown remarkable adaptability to our environment. They believe you're the perfect candidate. Thomas stood and began pacing, a habit he'd developed during difficult research problems. We can't let them continue these experiments. We have to expose this to your people, show them the truth. It's not that simple, Nalia said. The council members behind this project are among our most influential leaders. They truly believe they're saving our species. And technically, they haven't broken any Varen laws, we have no statutes protecting other species. Then we'll need proof. Something so compelling that even the most logical Varen can't ignore it. Thomas stopped pacing, turning to face her. You said emotions can't simply be transferred because the mind isn't prepared to handle them. What if we could prove there's already a natural process happening? That some Varens are already regaining their emotional capacity? Nalia tilted her head. What do you mean? You, Nalia. You're changing. I've seen it over these past weeks. Your expressions, your voice modulation, even your body language, you're experiencing real emotions, not just recognizing them in others. Her eyes widened slightly, another small but significant display of emotion. That's impossible. My genetic predisposition only allows for the recognition of emotional states, not the experience of them. Maybe that's not entirely true. Maybe prolonged exposure to emotional beings can awaken dormant capabilities. Thomas grew excited as the idea took shape. Think about it, you've spent more time with humans than any other Varen. What if emotional capacity isn't something that can be extracted and copied, but something that needs to be cultivated, like a garden? Before Nalia could respond, an alarm blared through the ship. Red light pulsed through the privacy field, and Nalia's expression turned grave. They're here, she said. The extraction team. They're not waiting for planetary landing. She grabbed his arm. We need to move. Now. They ran through the ship's corridors, which had become eerily empty. Where is everyone? Thomas asked as they ducked into a maintenance shaft. Most of the crew supports the extraction project, Nalia explained, leading him deeper into the ship's infrastructure. They won't interfere. They emerged in a section of the ship Thomas hadn't seen before. The walls here were darker, lined with what looked like organic circuitry. The auxiliary control center, Nalia said, her fingers flying over a control panel. We can transmit from here. Transmit what? Evidence. She pulled up a holographic display showing medical data. My neural patterns over the past weeks, compared to baseline Varen readings. You were right, they've changed. I'm experiencing true emotional responses, not just recognizing them. And it happened naturally, through interaction and understanding. The door behind them hissed open. Rian stood there with two other Varens, all holding devices Thomas didn't recognize but instinctively knew were weapons. Step away from the console, Nalia, Rian said. The Council has authorized immediate extraction procedures. You can't, Thomas stepped forward. Your previous attempts killed the subjects. And the Varens who received the transfers went mad. We've refined the process, Rian replied calmly. The risk is acceptable given the potential benefit. Listen to yourself, Nalia pleaded. You're talking about murder, about forcing changes that should happen naturally. Look at my neural readings, emotional capacity can be restored through peaceful interaction. We don't need to steal it. We don't have decades to wait for natural processes, one of the other Varens said. Our society is stagnating. We need immediate results. Thomas looked between them, the cold, logical Varens with their weapons, and Nalia, whose eyes now showed clear fear and determination. In that moment, he made his choice. He lunged for the console, slamming his hand down on what he hoped was the transmission control. Show them, he shouted to Nalia. Show everyone. Rian fired his weapon, but Nalia moved faster than Thomas thought possible, pushing him aside. The energy blast caught her in the shoulder, sending her spinning into the console. But her fingers had already completed the sequence. Throughout the ship, and across the entire Varen communication network, the evidence began to play, Nalia's neural patterns, the failed experiment data, everything. Thomas caught her as she fell, holding her as waves of information washed through the ship's systems. The garden, Nalia whispered, looking up at him with eyes that now held unmistakable emotion. You were right. Some things can't be taken. They have to be grown. Rian and his team stood frozen, watching as their carefully hidden project was exposed to every Varen in the system. And in the silence that followed, Thomas held Nalia close, wondering if they had just saved two civilizations, or doomed them both. The aftermath of the transmission swept through Varen society like a shockwave. Thomas sat in the council chamber 3 days later, watching as the mighty civilization grappled with the revelation of its leader's actions. Nalia stood beside him, her shoulder healed by their advanced medical technology, but her bearing forever changed by recent events. The chamber itself reflected the Varen aesthetic, all sweeping crystalline surfaces and impossible geometries. But now it felt less cold, somehow. Perhaps because the Varens filling it were showing the first stirrings of genuine emotion in generations. The evidence is irrefutable, the chief counselor stated, her voice carrying subtle variations in tone that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. The extraction project was not only unethical but fundamentally flawed. We cannot force emotional awakening without devastating consequences. Rian and his conspirators stood in the center of the chamber, their usual emotionless masks slipping to reveal something approaching shame. We sought to save our people, he said quietly. By destroying others? Thomas stepped forward, his voice firm but not unkind. You can't build emotional capacity on a foundation of cruelty. That's like trying to grow a garden by stealing other people's flowers. You might have something that looks alive, but it has no roots, no ability to thrive or reproduce. The botanist speaks truth, another council member said. Already, we are seeing changes among those who have had prolonged contact with him. Subtle variations in speech patterns, micro-expressions, even physical responses to stimuli. The process Nalia discovered is real. Thomas glanced at Nalia, remembering their conversation in the medical bay after the confrontation. She had been the first to show significant emotional development, but not the last. Like a dormant seed suddenly given water and light, the capacity for feeling had begun to awaken in those Varens who allowed themselves to truly interact with him. We propose a new approach, the chief counselor continued. Not extraction, not forced integration, but a gradual program of cultural exchange. We will learn to feel again, not by stealing emotions, but by remembering how to grow them. The human way is slower, Rian admitted, but the preliminary data suggests it is also more stable. No neural degradation, no psychological trauma. Just growth. Thomas felt Nalia's hand slip into his, a gesture that would have been unthinkable for a Varen just weeks ago. The touch sent warmth through him, reminding him of how far they'd both come. We have prepared a proposal, Nalia addressed the council. A series of exchange programs between our worlds. Carefully monitored, of course, and with full transparency to both species. We believe that through sustained, peaceful interaction, we can help our people rediscover their emotional heritage while sharing our technological and scientific advances with Earth. The chamber erupted in discussion, but this time the Varens' voices carried shades of excitement, curiosity, and even hope. Thomas watched in amazement as the formerly stoic beings engaged in actual debate, their faces showing subtle but distinct expressions. There will be challenges, the chief counselor said once the chamber had quieted. Earth's governments are still coming to terms with our existence. Many humans will fear us, especially once they learn of the extraction project. Then we start small, Thomas suggested. Begin with scientific and cultural exchanges. Let humans and Varens work together on joint projects, environmental restoration, medical research, space exploration. Build trust gradually, just as you'll rebuild your emotional connections gradually. Like tending a garden, Nalia added, squeezing his hand. With patience, care, and understanding. The council deliberated for several more hours, but in the end, the decision was unanimous. The exchange program would begin, and with it, a new chapter in the history of both species. Later, Thomas stood with Nalia in his quarters, looking out at the crystalline cities below. The Varen world no longer seemed as cold as it had when he first arrived. Or perhaps he had just learned to see the warmth hidden beneath its surface. You'll stay? Nalia asked, her voice carrying all the emotion she had discovered within herself. Help us build this bridge between our worlds? Thomas turned to her, seeing in her luminous eyes everything he had come to love about both her and her people, their capacity for growth, their dedication to understanding, and their newfound ability to feel. I'll stay, he said softly. After all, every garden needs a gardener. She smiled, a real, warm smile that transformed her entire being. And every gardener needs someone to remind them why growing things matter. Outside, the twin moons of the Varen world cast their eternal twilight over the crystal spires of the city. But now those spires seemed less like barriers and more like bridges, reaching not just toward the stars, but toward a future where two very different species could help each other become more than they ever thought possible. Thomas thought of his greenhouse back on Earth, of Olivia watching over his precious plants, and of all the new gardens he would help cultivate here among the stars. The universe, he realized, was the greatest garden of all, full of infinite possibilities, just waiting for someone to help them grow. Shall we begin? He asked, echoing the words that had started their journey. Nalia's response carried the weight of everything they had discovered together, about emotions, about growth, and about the boundless potential of two species learning from each other. We already have. The end.